Morning YouTubers, today I'm going to talk about cables, and I'm also going to discuss things that are not normally talked about on YouTube to do with wiring motorhomes. And it's very important to understand the very basics to do with cables. And you can see I've got a few cables and plugs and all sorts of stuff lying around. Okay, I'm going to clear some room, but we'll keep some of these bits to hand. Just shove those out of the way, and we don't need those. Don't need those. And we'll talk about these. What's that? Okay. Okay. Right, I'm ready now. When you see the current rating of a cable, let's take that one for example, the manufacturer of the cable quotes a current rating in amps. And say for example, this particular cable is 50 amps. Okay, now any cable that passes reasonable amount of current generates heat. So the manufacturers quote the current rating capacity of the cable at a certain temperature, and the certain temperature can be ambient, room temperature, or they quote 25 degrees, 30 degrees, something like that. This particular cable is quoted at 30 degrees C in free air, and that's where the spec of the cables come in. So any cables you buy, whatever current rating they are, they're quoted at one temperature and in free air. So they're not against the surface, they're not in plastic or metal conduit, they are simply in free air like this is now. To find the current rating at different temperatures or different applications, you have to consult the manufacturer's data sheet. And they sometimes call the other figures for the current rating correction currents, or they will have a number associated with it. Now, for example, this cable at 50 amp, according to the manufacturer, it can carry 50 amp at 30 degrees centigrade. And that's in free air, that's not in conduit, not in your van against the insulation or anything like that. That's purely in free air. Now, if the temperature is at 45 degrees C in your van, then the correction factor, or derating factor as it's sometimes called, is 0.79 times 50, the original current. Right, get a calculator. 50 amps multiplied by 0.79 equals 39 amps roughly. So at a higher temperature in free air, that cable can only carry 39 amps at 45 degrees centigrade. Now, if you go to 60 degrees, the correction factor or derating factor is 0.5. Okay, so let's get again. The original was 50 amps and you times it by 0.5. That gives you 25 amps. So that's 25 amps. So in free air with different temperatures, the hotter it is, the current rating of the cable goes down, the maximum. So you started off with a 50 amp cable. If it's 60 degrees centigrade, the maximum you can put through that cable is 25 amps. The opposite applies at lower temperatures. So I'm just going to stop the camera while I do some calculations. Okay, I've just looked at the tables. Each manufacturer produces these tables to do with their cables they make. However, there is British standards and European standards which gives you this information as well. Now then, let's look at 20 degrees C. That has a correction value of 1.12. So at 20 degrees C, 1.12 times 50. So that cable, rated at 50 amps, at 20 degrees C, can handle 56 amps. And at 10 degrees C, the correction value is 1.22. So, start again. 50 times 1.22. 61 amps. 61 amps. Right, now because you're in your motorhome, the temperature is going to vary quite a lot. Now, but if you can imagine you're putting your cabling into your motorhome and you're going to Spain where it can be 30 or 40 degrees, or in the desert, then that 50 amp cable can only handle 39 amps. So you fit the cable to suit your application. Now this is still in free air, with lots of air around it. When you start putting your cables behind the insulation of your van, or behind panelling, or you run it in ducting, whether the ducting is plastic or metal conduit or metal trunking, and also if cables are bunched together, they're not in and tied together with tie wraps or wrapped up with insulation tape or whatever, then they're not in ambient temperature anymore. They're not in free air. So if you can imagine, you've got this big, thick, let's just make sure the camera is still working. Yes, it is. So if you imagine you've got a big 100 amp cable in conduit, like that, and you've got a 50 amp cable in it, like that, and then you might have some of this for lighting. That is not in free air anymore. And there's also derating factors for use in conduit, and also when it's bunched together. And to get that information, you'll have to do your own research. So first of all, it's going to get warmer in plastic when it's passing current in a motorhome, if it's covered in insulation, if it's in double skins, if it's inside the chassis member underneath your vehicle. It is not in free air. It is not in free air. So the current capacity of your cable is going to be less. But this just shows you the factors involved in cables just in free air. Do your research, look at British standards, look at conduit cable, equipment wire. It's all there on the internet. Just look it up. And this is just one example of a cable that's rated at 50 amps at 30 degrees C. When you go above that temperature, you can't put 50 amps through the cable. If you go lower temperature, it can handle more because it's cooling the cable. But please take this into consideration when you're bunching wires through conduit, through your insulation, through the double panels of your van. The other consideration is when the cables run from the cabin area into the engine compartment. Are the cables you are fitting oil proof, petrol proof, diesel proof? Because it's damned hot inside an engine compartment, so you have to consider this as well. Now what I'll do now is, I've got this particular information is specifically to Snyder cables and PVC cable. For other materials like butyl rubber and PTFE and polycarbonate cables and stuff, they will all have similar tables. Now I'm going to include a table in this video, so you don't have to take my word for it, you can look at it yourself. Okay, so hopefully you fully understand that you derate cables to do with temperature, and you also derate cables to do with how many conductors you have in your trunking and what current their capacity they're handling. And if you look it up and do a search on the internet, you will find quite a lot of information regarding it. Now I'm just going to briefly mention power inverters again. This is mine. It's 12 volt and it's rated up to 1500 watts or 1.5 kilowatt, and the maximum current it can draw is 126 amps at 12 volt roughly. Now common sense prevails now to do with things. Now let's look at this inverter of mine. Now the first thing you may not be aware, it's got USB, an on and off switch and a single outlet, right? Okay. Now if you look closely at these terminals here, they're called binding posts. I'll take the black one off. You can see it's hollow. Now these are binding posts that are generally used on test equipment and small power supplies and things like that. And if you look the specification up of the current capacity of these, it's rated at 10 amps if you look them up. And if they've got a hole in the middle, that's designed for a plug to go in called a banana plug. So these are test terminals and not really meant for carrying 120 amps because they're hollow, got a hole in the middle. Okay. Now that's the first thing as an observation. They're not the right current capacity. They're just cheap ones, and to be honest you can get problems. Okay. With the unit is this. Okay, we all know that this can draw up to 120 amps when loaded. Do you think that'll carry 120 amps? No. Right. Take it apart. Okay. There's no fuse in it. Right, there's no fuse in there. So if you plug that into your cigarette lighter socket in your car, that's connected to the inverter. There's no fuse in the inverter. There's no fuse at all, and there's no fuse in that. So if you've got that plugged in and you're running, I don't know, 50 watts, that'd be fine. Plug something big in, you're going to blow the fuse in your car straight off. So common sense is that will not work very well at anything above 10 amps. Now then, just make sure the camera's working. Let's look at the leads. Come with it. That's the red one. That's the black one. Now, if you look at the eyelet, it's as thin as paper. That's, you can see the thickness. Okay, hopefully you can. Is that going to carry up to 120 amps? Pull this apart. Okay, it is soldered, but it's not clamped in any way. Right, so you fit these on the inverter, like that, and you clip it to your battery. If this goes faulty, where's the fuse? Come on, where's the fuse, guys? There's no fuse in that. There's no fuse in that. If you put them on the wrong terminal by mistake and you grab this lead and put it onto your car battery, or these two short out here by mistake, what's going to happen? That's going to instantly go up in smoke in your hand. There's no fuse, is there? Now with 120 amps, I would expect you would need something like this. Okay, and a cable like that, and with a whopping thick eyelet on the end, with a fuse somewhere, of course. So, common sense. What do you think?